Hello, hello, and good afternoon, Greater Akron and beyond. This is Coach Kemp with you on, what is this, November the 17th. Man, we got Thanksgiving coming up next week, so happy Thanksgiving to everybody. So excited to be with you today on another episode of Love Akron Live. And on Love Akron Live, we seek to encounter those who are change makers out here in our community doing really great things to bring about a sense of collective impact in the community and tell us how they are loving Akron. So today is no different. We are around the holiday season. And while the holidays can be, man, full of joy and excitement and laughs and plenty of food, it's also a time for some people to where, man, this is a depressing time of the year, whether it's due to the loss of a loved one, whether it's due to a loss of opportunity, jobs, divorce, anything. And so they don't see the holidays as joyful, but it brings back a remembrance of some things that didn't go so well, that went wrong. And so today is a very special episode and a topic that we really want to lean into and talk about when we start looking at depression and suicide awareness. And so I'm not going to do this in and of myself just because I'm limited when it comes to this. However, I do know of individuals that can come along and have some of these discussions with me and kind of tag team this talk. And we talk about this all the time, especially as men, because as men, we don't always know how to reach out and ask for help from people. We don't know how to extend ourselves and to acknowledge where we are, the fact that we're hurting and that we're going through pain. And so two brothers that's going to be running with me today are both high-level clinicians in our city that are doing really great things, not only just to love Akron, but also to love the ones that they're serving. One is my friend and my brother, Michael Montgomery. He is the founder and owner of Empower Counseling. He's out here doing his thing, and he has a tremendous story and testimony. He has a heart as well as really to speak into men as far as it comes to depression and their own mental health challenges. And we also have Tony Ingram. Tony Ingram is the chief probation officer over at Summit County Court. And so these are two men that I highly respect. And I said, listen, there was a text that went out last week from Brother Shelton, Terrence Shelton, and there was another African-American male who committed suicide. And it's like, man, listen, we're out here hurting. People are dying. The suicide rate continues to grow and increase. Man, we got to keep talking about this. It's kind of like the discussion when it comes to race and the racism in our world. And it's affecting us. But the one thing we can't stop doing is we can't stop talking about it. We can't forego the conversation because the conversation has ripple effects. And it's the same thing when it comes to mental health and wellness. When it comes to suicide awareness, we have to continue to talk about it. One of the myths that we can get stuck in is saying, hey, if I talk to somebody or if I ask somebody about, hey, have you ever thought about hurting yourself? We feel like we're planting a seed, but really that's a myth. No. We got to be ready to ask the questions. And mental health first aid, which I'm a certified instructor in, man, we can help you to ask the questions in a really healthy way, but also empower you to do that in a way that, man, if you get that answer and somebody says yes, then there's a next stage of questions that we have to take them into. If they say no, hey, great, but man, somebody ask them. Because a lot of times I think as people, we just want to know if somebody cares. We want somebody to ask so that we can acknowledge where we are and how we feel. And so, again, we're gonna take a dive into this today, and I'm really excited about just our guests we're going to be bringing on, and I want to bring them on in now because, hey, listen, we want to jump right into this thing. It's the holiday season. These are two men that I highly respect of who they are and what they do and how they are really in this community and loving it well. So, man, Brother Tony Ingram, man, how you doing today, brother?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for putting this together as always and having this important discussion today. So thank you.
Absolutely. Brother Michael, man, how are you?
Coach, you know I'm always doing well. Thank you for the great opportunity to talk about this issue. It is so necessary. So I appreciate you taking the time to lean in more about this issue.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, you all are the professionals. Not only are you professional, but you're the professional in your own experience and in your own stories. So I'm just going to come right out and ask, what is going on right now in our society, especially when it comes to us as men, and particularly Black men? What's going on?
Well, I think for me, what I'm seeing out here in my therapy session is Black men are still marginalized, and from that marginalization, they feel ostracized, criticized, and left out. No hope, no faith. Things are never going to change. This is the way it's always been. A young man said to me the other day, Mike, it seems like we're worse off today than we were when Martin Luther King and Malcolm X was out there pounding the pavement, talking about what's going on. So a culmination of all those things, lack of some mentorship and some nurturing in the home, it's not one thing, but it's a combination of many things. And they feel like they are just hopeless and helpless. And the quickest way out is to just remove themselves from the situation. And that's what I see a lot of in session.
What about you, Tony?
I would concur with what Michael has said, and the reality is we look at, you see things on TV, they're talking about the economy is doing this, and we've created this many jobs in a certain period of time, but the outcomes in the reality, it never really seems to hit the African American community. We still, although things are going well, we still have the highest unemployment rate of any group. We are still struggling more than other groups. So all the prosperity and all the great things that are happening don't impact us necessarily in the same way that it impacts some of our other brothers and sisters that are out there. And that's real for folks. And they recognize and they see that. And it's like Michael said, so you develop sort of this sense and feeling of hopelessness, like, man, what do I got to do? And so I think a lot of that is really going on, and people are sort of reaching for that hope, reaching for that light, just to keep on going.
Yeah, I had an opportunity yesterday to record our Intersection podcast with Pastor Jeff Bogue, Grace of Greater Akron, and also Bishop Johnson, founding pastor over at House of the Lord. And what we've started to talk about is there's the problem, right? And there's a problem of racism or of COVID or of economics or politics. There's a problem, but then there's the pain behind the problem. And it seems like to me, and we talked about this yesterday, is that we've Americanized everything. And let me explain what that means. We're so quick in America to win, to have a victory, or to fast forward to a solution, that we really don't take the time to allow people to express the pain behind the problem. We just want to get them through. We just want to microwave it through to say, oh man, yeah, we got a solution, that everything's fixed and everything's great. But man, and I feel like that's some of the challenge here. Are we taking time to say, hey man, brother, just communicate, man, the pain of, man, being unemployed. What does that feel like? Not being able to provide for your family. Like, what does that feel like to you? What is that? And it's just like, oh man, I know this person, man, they can get you this job, right? And then when you don't get that job, then the rejection sets in of, now I've been rejected twice. Yeah. But I haven't allowed them to process the pain of how the rejection felt. Am I making sense here? Or am I just off on a tangent?
No, I think you absolutely are, and especially as we talk about that from men, what you're talking about is being vulnerable and have an opportunity to express that. Society doesn't really it doesn't reward some of that vulnerability, especially when it comes to men. We're supposed to just tough through it, and we think we may be. But our body and our mind and our spirit is telling us something different.
Yeah. For me, is not just what you talked about, Coach. I call that's the acute issue, that lack of job, but we have to go back more generational. I am dealing with this individual in my office, but I'm also dealing with the pain of his father and his mother and his grandfather. So he's a product of all that pain and disappointment and confusion, dysfunction, and now it's sitting front and center in my office. So I'm trying to establish a safe pathway for him to process all of that. He has some real deep thoughts about his mom and his dad and his grandpa and what it's like to be a man. And one man was telling me about how some person out there has a show, and they lump men in two categories where he's either an alpha male or a beta male. And if you're alpha, it's all things good. But if you're a beta, you're like this subservient, this eunuch. You have no rights to want to be better. You're just someone who's always doing, the base things. And I'm just like, you can't think of yourself in those two constructs because you are unique to yourself and you can't compare yourself to nobody else. But getting that message across when society has gave them a message that you are either or, you're either on top or you're on bottom. So all this is in that terrible stew that they've been partaking of, and it's made them sick and ill, and depression and anxiety. And I tell people, if you have depression, her twisted sister is somewhere around the corner named anxiety. So they run together.
Yeah, it seems, I love how you talk about it because we can get like that, right? Sometimes, well, somebody can begin to talk about their pain of what's going on, and it's like our quick response, sometimes a reaction is, oh yeah, I know exactly what you mean, man. Yeah, because I felt like that too. But it's like, no, man, there's variances of pain.
Yes.
And everybody's pain is not the same, right? It's just not the same. And so sometimes that can be seen as me projecting a sense of dismissing your pain and how you feel. And then now I feel somewhat ashamed of feeling the way I feel about my pain. And now I feel like, because this is how as men, we were raised and brought up, right? It's like, oh man, we just got to pick ourselves up by our bootstraps and we got to dust ourselves off and we got to be men, right? And well, what does that look like and what does that mean? And so therefore I begin to suppress how I feel, which is really the pain of the situation that you told me, exactly how I feel. And so now I begin to look to you to get me out of my pain, not realizing that our pain is the same. You know what I mean? And so, Tony, we talked about this a lot, some months ago about when we start looking at suicide, we can't always identify why this is happening, right? That's kind of a big, huge question. But I do want to ask, how much as what's going on over the past 2 years plays a role in that? Or is what's happened the past 2 years is really exposing a deeper issue that's always been there?
So one of the things, and obviously over the past couple of years, one of the things that we're dealing with is COVID. And one of the big things that we want to try and avoid is isolation. And COVID by itself put all of us in this very isolative state where we stop interacting with people. We were all sort of hemmed up in our home to deal with lots of things that you talked about. So there are people out there dealing with that pain on their own, simply because of the physical limitations that we had for quite some time. And with that, because we were in isolation, those of us who are out there and are able to recognize what some of that depression and some of those risk factors look like, we're not even there to help pick up on those things, to reach out to someone and say, hey, what's going on? And to let them know that you're not dealing with that pain on your own. I'm here with you and I'll walk with you. So In addition to a lot of the social issues that we talked about, there's been that physical isolation as well that has really exacerbated the problem of depression, anxiety, and suicide.
And Mike, I know we've talked many times, man, and you've been very, I like to use the term hot, humble, open, and transparent about telling your own story. And how do you feel like the platform of you being able to share that story to other men, but also just other people in general, how has that continued to liberate you? But also, do you feel like that's been a great tool to help to liberate others as they go through the battle of pain, but also depression and some of the other things that are going on?
Yeah, that is excellent. I am grateful for having gone through my traumatic experience because it has made me a better person, a better dad, a better husband, and most of all, well, equally a better therapist. I'm no longer textbook. I can really understand the pain and the depths of the pain and understanding how what I call an irrational, rational thought, which is suicide. It's irrational because you're ending your life, but it's rational because naturally the body wants to get rid of pain. And it's liberating to know that I can get rid of this pain by just ending it all right now. So telling that story gives them permission to be okay with that pain. You're gonna go through this pain, but don't give up. Let me be a testimony for you to say, yeah, I was in a very dark place, but once you come out, I truly believe you come out better. It's like Shawshank Redemption, where it says the guy went through all that gunk and other stuff, and he came out clean on the other side. I do believe if you can make it through, you do come out clean on the other side, but you do have experience knowing that I can help somebody else who is going through some of the same similar things that I experienced. So that's what I like about it, that I'm grateful that I was brought through, that I could share it and hopefully help somebody else who's on that ledge.
Yeah. This probably should have been one of the first things I did, one of the first questions I asked you guys, and I'm sorry for that because I think terms go a long way. Could both of you, just from a high level clinical perspective, define? I'm gonna start with you first, Tony. Can you define and tell us what is depression? How do we define depression?
Whew. I'm gonna let Michael attack that first from from a clinical perspective, and I'll tackle it from a sociological perspective as well. Michael, why don't you talk about it clinically?
Well, clinically, depression really is defined by the DSM-5 as having sadness for almost every day. You loss of interest in things that you used to find joy in. You can either eat too much, don't eat enough. You can either sleep too much, not sleep enough. You could be irritable. You could be tired. You could be cranky. All of these things are part of how we diagnose you with depression. So you have to meet certain qualities, and that's the clinical side of it. That we go to the DSM-5 and we go down a checklist, which seems very sanitized way of doing it. And anecdotally, when someone is in your office, they have a way of just, it's almost like what I call the milky look, where they're just there, but they're not there, and they're really suffering. And you could see it the moment they hit your office.
And I would add, and so I asked Michael to give that clinical term in his practice, that's how he's treating folks based on some of that clinical criteria. And what I think all of us talk about a lot is there's lots of folks who, as we described, are dealing with some stuff, and you just have this sense of hopelessness, and you find yourself sleeping more, and you find yourself not interacting with the people you used to interact with, and we use terms, oh man, I'm just feeling down. Yes, That's depression. And it can be acute, it can be chronic, and having the treatment for each of those things is a little different. But however we label it, there is this sense that life is not normal for you, and there is this real sense of sadness, and I mean it overwhelms you. It becomes who you are. That's serious, deep clinical depression. But no less important is this idea that we deal with a lot on a daily basis, and it becomes overwhelming, and just sort of shutting down. And like I said, and you find yourself getting tired. And Michael said, you either overeat or you don't eat. There is something not normal about your everyday life. What you've been used to has been altered, and yeah, recognizing that can become really, really hard, especially if there's not someone to help you recognize that you're going through those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, Kemp, if I may add, it's not always just today I woke up and I'm depressed. It's usually over time. And today I'm just not feeling too good. I think I'm going to call off work tomorrow. It's even harder. It just keeps going, and going. And then you're really in a really dark space. So I like some of those commercials that say, if you see something with your friend, just say, hey, is everything okay? Just a quick check-in.
Yeah, I like the check-in approach. It's something that I've done and I've been doing in my own home, but also with young men that I coach. I do it with our team at Love Akron, because I just don't think we do that enough with each other. I don't think we stop before we get into the meeting. We don't stop and say, hey, just give me one word to say where you are. And at Love Akron, we talk about, hey, as you give your report out, hey, give us your victories, but also give us your challenges. What does that look like? And really being able to tap in to some of those questions. What I want to talk to you both about today, because this came up in another meeting, and Michael, you're going to know exactly where I'm going with this. But as we look at things like the ACEs test to help to quantify some of the early childhood type of things, first of all, let our audience know, how does ACEs work? What's it utilized for? And how can that be a help or an assistance to the individual that took it, but also to a lay person like me or to a professional like yourself? I'm going to start with you first, Michael.
Okay, so ACEs is the Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's, I believe it's just a quick 10 questionnaire about your experiences as a child. And it was designed, I believe, to kind of show that if you have if you score at this level, you're going to have some other issues, some other health issues. It could say you're more predisposed to hypertension or this or that. And ACEs has been around for a while. They're thinking about changing it so it could be more culturally relevant. But if I must say, Kemp, earlier this morning, I was trying to chime in and say was that ACEs is a simplistic test that has so many nuanced interpretations to it. And it's about your culture. It's about what you grew up in. What was natural in your home?
So it talks about what was natural in your home?
Yes, sir.
Oh, man.
That's what it doesn't get. That's part of
Okay.
the nuance. It's more just a global test or a global assessment, but it can't get to the nuanced variables of your own home.
Okay. So Tony, kind of tell us how does somebody take the ACEs and really help to, I don't want to say the word treat, but it is treat.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you as a professional utilize that, right, as a tool? But then how can somebody like me who's not a professional, right, like to even be able to speak into that person from a language perspective?
Sure. So I'll pick up where Michael sort of left off, and so the ACEs came about from a weight loss clinic that they discovered women who were going through Dr. Filitti's clinic, and it was through Kaiser Permanente, were going through their program, were losing weight, were coming back months later, all the weight had come back and even beyond. And so they began to ask some questions as to what was going on with these women, and came up with some of those 10 questions, some 10 central themes that came out of some of that discussion. And so the importance of the ACEs is really what Michael said, in that if you have a particular number of ACEs, it increases your likelihood of having some physical manifestations of that trauma that has occurred in your life. And so those 10 questions are really getting at to what are some of the traumatic things that have happened to you as a childhood, to help us understand and to try and help us in a sense predict what may be potential risk for you. So we know that people who have a certain number of ACEs have a higher propensity for high blood pressure. They have a higher propensity for depression. They have a higher propensity for suicide, all of those things. And so even as someone who's not necessarily a clinician, because there's lots of places where it's used. We use it in criminal justice to really help to begin to establish that foundation and to have meaningful conversation with individuals about their overall physical and mental health, and really emphasize the importance of why you need to follow up with your medical professional and also your mental health professionals as well.
Well, Lori, she was texting me like, listen, it's too much of y'all on there as far as men. I need to come in and jump in because I got some questions and I got some things I want to say too. So Tony, you might not know this. Michael learned about this morning, but Lori, I think now past 2 weeks, she became a trained specialist in the grief recovery method. So we want to celebrate Lori for that. But also, I just want to bring Lori in because Lori has been for a long time working from a sense of our heart is family. And how are some of these family things, as we talk about in ACEs, how is this getting spelled out? So I want to give you all the opportunity. Here goes Lori, who's not a professional clinician, but she is a trained specialist in the grief recovery method, and she's going to help people process through grief. So is the ACEs score, is that something that's good for her to be able to look at and just have a basic understanding of, right? How can that be an asset or a help to someone like Laura, who's a trained specialist in the grief recovery method?
It can help identify where some of the areas in that person's life where that grief can be. So, one of the things that they look at and address, do you come from a home where you've witnessed abuse? Do you come from a home where you've been abused? Do you come from a home where you have lacked having the basic necessities of life? And imagine if you're a young person and you're worried about eating, and we know we have young people who go through that on a daily basis, and you having to sacrifice for even a younger sibling saying, you know what, I'm not going to eat today so that my younger brother or sister can eat. You're going to have to deal with that trauma and deal with that pain as you described it earlier, Kemp, and go through that process of experiencing that grief. No one's supposed to experience those things. That's the importance of ACEs. We're not supposed to go through that stuff as human beings, but we do. And that grief recovery, I think, is an amazing tool to help people process through those traumatic events that happened in their childhood.
Well, if I could jump in and say this, I heard what Tony said, and he's right. The issue and the challenge is, and we talked about it this morning a little bit with Lori and Kemp, is understanding that African Americans don't see this as this was not supposed to happen. We see it more like this is our norm. So my score may be much lower because doesn't every dad yell at them? Don't your dad say, "Hey, big dummy, get over here," blah, blah, blah. That's what I'm saying. So we also have to understand, Lori, that I don't want to say a cultural bias, but there is a cultural understanding that some of this we've already conditioned ourselves that, well, that wasn't that bad because everybody dad whooped them.
And I'll just add to what Michael said, and he brought it up before. There is a group in Philadelphia who is trying to address these issues to add some very culturally specific trauma responses that we deal with. So in the original ACEs, it doesn't really talk about things that we may be a little more accustomed to in the inner city. So, one of the things that they ask, how often do you hear gunfire? That's a traumatic event to have to hear that. But as Michael said, for folks, that's every day.
Yeah.
And we normalize that. But just because we normalize it doesn't mean that it's not impacting us emotionally, mentally, and physically. And so there is some work out in Philadelphia around expanding the ACEs to deal with some of those specific cultural issues.
Yeah. And I would say that I use the analogy of a smartphone that we all have. My battery was constantly running low. The processor was slow. So, of course, I gave it to somebody better than a Geek Squad. I gave it to my 14-year-old daughter. And she said, "Dad, the problem is you got all of these apps open. You got to close out all of these apps." So I use that analogy that we have this stuff, like you said, Tony, running in our background, in our subconscious, and it really is affecting us. And until someone brings it to our consciousness that, hey, listening to and hearing gunshots every day is not the way it really supposed to be. Just because it has become what you are accustomed to, that doesn't make it something that's not affecting you in the background.
Absolutely. Lord, you spoke to something like that this morning with your granddaughter. You don't necessarily have to share, but you said something similar as far as you said, man, at 3 years old, she knew this wasn't the norm.
Right.
Like she knew this, she knew at 3, this is not really how it's supposed to be, is it? Like she had that awareness. So I kind of want you to touch on that. You don't have to necessarily use that, but you've had some experiences even before you became a specialist. The specialist just kind of affirms who you are and what you've been doing, right, for all these different years. So what are you seeing, Lori, and how do you feel like, hey, I'm glad I have this because now I can start from a, if you will, as a professional in the method, now I can start leaning into this a little bit more.
Wow. Yes. So I'm not sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Because on my end it says my mic was muted. Okay. We've got a new gal that we're training in AV, and she is doing a fabulous job. Shout out to Danny today. But I will tell you, I got to put a plug in for the work that we are doing with Love Akron as it relates to grief recovery. We, along with Suma Health and with the ADM board as our primary investor, we have been able to train 15 specialists, some are advanced specialists, who have the ability to take you through grief recovery method online, not even in person. You can do it virtually. We have many of those specialists that are meeting with folks in places and spaces, physically distancing, wearing masks, and whatever's necessary to keep us safe. But I want to tell you that a gal handed me this book back in maybe 2006. And I just began to read through the book before I had ever gone through an official grief recovery class. I had read through the book several times. And I want to say that grief recovery is not counseling, it is not therapy, but it is a tool to help you navigate through many life's changes and losses. And so we think about loss sometimes, we think about death, but in fact, grief is the natural, normal response to any change or loss in life. So you lose good health, there's a death, there's a divorce, there's a miscarriage. You move, your job transfers you, and not just for you, but for your entire family. Parents might be great about going to Florida to work, but the kids are leaving their friends behind. It's a tremendous loss. And so just the work that I had done reading through the grief recovery book and then going through the grief recovery method experience, I learned myself as it brought me through a time of divorce. My mother had dementia, and so she was my BFF, the one that knew most of my secrets. There were a few I kept to myself, but she knew a lot of them, right? And I remember in 2012, going in her closet to get something because by that time she couldn't even dress herself. Her faculties, her brain was not functioning. The messaging wasn't saying, that's the third skirt you've put on, now put on a shirt. And so, I mean, literally, you talk about grief. My mother died in 2019 and somebody was like, you seem like you're all right. And I said, because I grieved the loss of my buddy, that conversation, the relationship as I knew it back in 2012. And so her physical absence from the earth realm for me was a welcomed experience because this sweet woman that loved Jesus could no longer verbally communicate, could not feed herself, couldn't do anything for herself. She had Jesus at the core. I got to put a plug in there because she was still the sweetest woman I knew, was kind. And her transition, the hospice nurse said, I've never seen anybody transition like that. She just turned her head one way, breathed in, breathed out, closed her eyes, and went to be with Jesus. It was loss nonetheless. I grieved that loss, but I will be honest with you and tell you that I had a greater grieving experience when I could no longer talk to her about life's issues. So I'm picking up my granddaughter, and she's 3 years old at the time. And she's saying, yes, Nana, my birthday's coming. I'm going to be 4. And we're just talking like you do. You're Nan, so you just talk and you listen. And she was sharing with me that when we reminisced on her 3rd birthday, she said, well, yeah, but on my 3rd birthday, we moved from our house to this motel. I could detect almost like a disgust in her voice. And so my having gone through grief recovery, understanding loss is not just death, I said to her, so is it okay that you all move from your house to a motel? That's what she calls it. It was an apartment. And she said, Nans, all 3-year-olds don't move from their house when they turn 3 years old. My experience with the grief recovery method said to me instantly, a light bulb went off. And that is her first memory, I would think, of a loss that she's experienced in life at 3 years old. So I quickly said to my daughter and my then son-in-law that it was going to be imperative for them to be careful about movement in her life. For some people, moving is not a problem. It doesn't bother them. They don't see it as a loss. They see it as an adventure. So for one person, moving from a home where you have a front yard and a backyard created for her a great sense of loss. But for someone else, it might not. It might be, we look at loss as people have pets. Pets die, and for folks that are not animals lovers, like I used to not be until I got my now dog called Diamond, and I love her. And so I understand a little bit. I have a bit of a way to kind of gauge how people grieve over things like animals. It seems silly to me before Diamond. I just thought it's a dog. Get over it. Let it go. But then that also speaks back, guys, to what you all were talking about when you talked about norms. And it could be a cultural norm, but it could also be not even cultural, just your family. People laugh at the Medea movies when she says, you know, in a lot of those movies, you see that we know this saying, what happens in this house stays in this house. But we're different now and we're learning more. So it's not okay that our uncles and our cousins.
No. I love what you're saying, because here's the thing. Here's what I want to say, and I want to ask this. And hey, shout out to Pastor Jeffrey Dennis,
yes,
founder of Minority Behavioral Health. Man, I'm trying to see if I can get him to jump on really quick, because I would love to see his insights from a pastor's perspective. And how do I do this with my congregation? So, Lori, I'm going to go into what you just said. And I think Michael and Tony, you said it too. So are we within the Black community, are we having to relearn from a standpoint of saying that, no, it's not supposed to be that way? No, I don't need to keep what's going on in my house. But it's almost reteaching a mindset that's been embedded within our communities for decades, for centuries. And it almost feels like now we're having to relearn some things and we're being retaught some things. I mean, would you say that's true, Michael? I mean, was that something that was in your house when you grew up and says, hey, what happens here stays here?
Well, you know what, Kim, is words matter. I think innately we know these things, but I think we've had to adjust to saying this is not the way it's supposed to be. So we know it, but I think there's a scripture that says, if you know these things, happy are ye if ye do these things. So I think we know that just keeping this very traumatic, sick, ill house a secret is not conducive to it getting better. But we said we're going to roll with it. But when we get older, guess what happens? It starts spilling out because we know that wasn't the way it truly was supposed to be. And that's when they come to my office to get some help, because now they want to deal with, that was a sick house. It really was. So it's an adjustment. So I think we also have to educate and market that keeping things in your home is going to eventually bear itself out within you, within your next generation, and maybe the generation to come. So let's deal with it now, so we don't have to deal with it 2 generations later.
Absolutely. The ripple effects, right? The ripple
Yes,
effects. Sir. Tony, I want to talk to you about this because I know you're very passionate about it. And we even said it today. We're going to be talking about depression and suicide awareness. What is suicide awareness? Suicide within the African-American communities is on the rise. I think you said it might have been 4 months ago when we got together. I think you used the number 40%. And so when we talk about suicide awareness, Tony, what are we really talking about here? That we just become more aware that suicides are happening, or is it something preventatively that we need to be doing before that happens? Help us to understand that.
A lot of it is what we're doing now. A lot of it is what Michael has done in sharing his story. And so that awareness becomes normalizing. And Michael is an amazing example of, we got stuff, and sometimes it is okay that we got some stuff, but we are strong and we can go through this and we can get through that pain. But more importantly, it is important not to hide and not to bury that pain. Talking about it, relieving that pain, it is helpful. Doesn't make us any less strong. It doesn't make us any less resilient. It frees us from not only the mental anguish, but for me, the big thing is that physical anguish. And as we normalize things and we're using that term, I want us all to understand the impact of that quote normalization is we have the highest rates of high blood pressure. We have the highest rates of heart disease. We die younger than everybody because of those norms that we just don't deal. And so bringing that awareness, especially around the issue of suicide, is we have to talk about it. And I do hope we can get past Pastor Dennis on this call, but his group as well to help tell that story and to help find ways for us to be comfortable, to talk about the pain that we have, to talk about the grief that we have. And that's why grief recovery is so important. And I know we have talked about this before, as we like to label things. Boy, culturally, we're grieving, and we have a right to, because there's been some horrific things throughout our history that have happened to our community. So that's that awareness. We can't stop hiding behind that pain anymore. So,
hey, if you could, Tony, say that again. We're grieving, and we have a right to. Say, please, because that opens the door of freedom for people.
Yes.
Because I think for so long, I don't know if we believe, because we haven't given ourselves permission to grieve some of the atrocities and some of the things that we've experienced, right? And then it's like we have to go to our white brothers and sisters, and it's like, man, we need your permission to grieve out openly. Like, yeah, we can grieve to ourselves and our families amongst ourselves, but man, I need you to step in here with me to understand what this is about.
That's right.
And that I'm hurting, not because I'm saying, oh man, well, that happened years ago. George Floyd, man, wasn't that 2 years ago? Hey, that the ripple effects of what happened 2 years ago, we are still feeling now. Because for some of us, we've never openly dealt with the grief that is associated. And some of the Black men who are committing suicide is the ripple effects of what happened 2 years ago. Because it's like, hey, I'm in a country that I don't feel loves me or believes in who I am. So, man, I feel like this is my only out. And I just, man, and I believe Pastor Dennis is going to be jumping on. I wanted to, because, man, this is not only, man, is he just a strong man of God. He's a pastor, but also he's putting his time, his effort, his talent, his treasure into this work right now. So, hey, if you're on Facebook and you're commenting, you don't never know. Coach Boyd is going to pull on you and say, hey, man, come jump on. Because this is an important discussion that we can never stop talking about. We cannot end this discussion. I know it's going to be fatiguing. It is. It's not something that the emotion that can pour out from this is not always going to be one that's comfortable, but it's going to be one that is continuing to challenge us. And so I believe Pastor Dennis is with us right now. I'm just, man, I'm glad he was able to jump on with us, because I think his perspective is so important. Pastor Dennis, my man. How you doing, Pastor?
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm doing fantastic. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay, great. I can, you guys. Oh my goodness. Good afternoon, everybody. It's so good to see you all and to hear.
Come on. Listen. This is what we need. We need these circles. We need to be able to talk about this openly. We're going to get Pastor Dennis back on. I'm sure there was just a connectivity issue. We're going to try to get him back, because I think he's been doing this work for a long time in this community. I mean,
Coach, may I say something real quick?
Please go ahead.
You know, I'm be very transparent, and Tony and Coach, y'all know me. I'm very transparent. I must admit right now that I am literally on eggshells about to weep. I don't know how these two major national cases are going to shake out. The experience, the culture in me is saying, Mike, why are you putting so much hope in that? You know how this is going to go. But the hope, the faith, and the please, not this time is begging, please let it turn out in a good way. And I'm telling you right now, I'm on pins and needles. And if it doesn't shake out the way in which I would desire, I'm going to go through some depression. Like, here we go again.
Yep. Yep. And I think it goes back to what we talked about, man. It's kind of what we've gotten used to happening.
Yes.
We get used to, the other shoe dropping. We get used to fumbling at the goal line, so to speak. But we got Pastor Dennis back. Pastor Dennis, man, I just want to give you platform to be able to speak in, because I saw you on Facebook. I saw you was commenting. Man, Pastor Dennis, you've committed your life to this work. Not just as a pastor, who you are and what you are, but so much so you believe that you created a mental health organization called Minority Behavioral Health Group. Pastor Dennis, man, I'm just opening up the floor to you, man. Just speak to us.
Well, again, good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me? You can hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
I appreciate the work and the conversation that has been taking place on today. And Kemp, I appreciate your leadership with Love Akron. Anytime I see you pop on Facebook Live, I usually try to jump on to hear what you're doing or to be a part of.
I want to say this though. I don't know if you all know, but even the Change Direction Committee that we met with this morning, which is a group of folks that continue to meet through the ADM Board of Summit County. When we did the Change Direction initiative, we brought it here under Russ Pry right before he had died, and began this mental health journey. Pastor Dennis was one of those leading the charge, saying that we have to equip our churches to deal with mental health issues. And Pastor Dennis had put together all kinds of tools and materials to help pastors and faith leaders. Kemp often says, you don't have to believe what I believe, but you got to love what I love, and we love Akron. And so Pastor Dennis was very instrumental in helping us to prepare pastors and faith leaders to speak to their congregations about mental health. He'll tell you that, as a culture of people, I was raised Catholic, but my mother was Pentecostal. And if there was a problem, honey, they said, get that oil. We're going to lay hands on you, and we just going to pray that thing away. And that can be true. Emerge Ministries formulated the same way. Pastor Dennis will tell you, because there was no space for people of faith to really sit and talk about what they were going through and have faith in God. And so that was majorly instrumental in a lot of the work that we did. Tony, you were a part of that. And I think the largest group that met, people got continuing education units during that conference. Yep. The faith community, though, which the Change Direction faith component is I think it's the single standing component that is still functioning today. We expected that to be the smallest class. Yes. And we must have had over 150 people crammed into a room, no COVID, thank you, Jesus. But we were crammed into that room, learning how people of faith could talk about the struggle of mental health and help folks in our community. So we'll have to have Pastor Dennis come back, because he is like, whoa, when it comes to mental health, like my hero. I love to just sit and let him pour in all of his many years of wisdom and knowledge. So,
Coach Kemp, you had said something this morning that is so profound, and I hope you understand how profound it was. You said We can't just create something for the sake of creating it for this moment. We have to create things that are sustaining, that's going to be around. You said, because if not, our people are going to flock to it and then say, once again, it dropped out and now I don't have it. I thought that was very profound, and I wanted to tell you that this morning, but I'm telling you that live here now in front of all these witnesses, that really is very profound what you said.
Man, brother, I thank you for speaking that into me. And we just see that a lot. And again, I'm not against programs, but we'll program things to death, and then when the money runs out, the program goes away.
Oh.
And then we leave, and then that group of people is left. And people say, well, man, remember that program we used to have that it did this, or there was this after school thing, and then it's just gone. And then sometimes it gets rebranded into something else, and something else happens. But we have to start creating spaces of sustainability, which means that the way things, in my opinion, become a little bit more sustainable when we're doing it together.
Yeah.
We're not doing it in isolation. We're not doing it from a silo, but I'm doing it from a collective impact mindset to say, hey, I only know what I know, but I'm going to bring my unique gifting and talent and treasure to this. Man, Tony, can you bring yours? Hey, Mike, can you bring yours? Lord, and Pastor Dennis, can you bring yours? To now where, hey, man, and listen, I got 6 kids, so I watched a lot of Barney growing, raising these children, right? And the one thing that I took from Barney was many hands make light work.
Light work. Yeah.
Many hands, right? That's the body of Christ. Many hands, because we're not all individual churches, so we got to get out of that mindset. We're not individual churches. We're individual congregations that form one church, and that's his church. That's who we are. Yeah. And so I'm going to segue and slide it over to my man, Pastor Dennis, because, man, there's so much wisdom, knowledge in what you're saying. Because, Pastor Dennis, you've been in this work for a long time. You was at the start of Change Direction, which Lori just said, and that movement and bringing it into the faith community, into the churches, to make it okay for us, especially predominantly Black churches, to talk about mental health. First of all, let me thank you not only for your time. You came in short notice, but thank you more than anything else, man, for being a trailblazer here in the city of Akron as we continue to discuss mental health. Pastor Dennis.
Well, thank you, Kemp. I know I keep getting cut off, and so I tried a third device, but thank you for letting me share this time with you all. It's already been so enlightening as you've talked about so many different things. I think, Kemp, in Acts chapter 16, there's this story of Paul and Silas in prison. They're singing and praying at midnight. An earthquake takes place. The chains fall off. All the prisoners are freed. The jailer who is responsible for making sure that the prisoners stayed locked up saw that they were free, knew that they were free. He takes his sword and he prepares to kill himself. So in that particular story, we have a story of a suicidal man right in front of the church. So listen to this. Because Paul knew Roman culture as well as theology, Paul could address the man culturally by saying to him, don't take your life, do yourself no harm. We are still all here. The culture of the jailer would have been, if those prisoners would have escaped, their culture was you take your life or you would be killed. But because Paul understood that, he could speak to that jailer right where he was. And now, as a result of addressing the jailer the jailer now has questions, and the question was, what must I do to be saved?
Mm.
And so the jailer understood that he had other options other than suicide. Okay. And so he says, what must I do to be saved? Paul says, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. The man gets saved, his whole household gets saved. And in that story, we see a person who changes their direction as it relates to their mental thinking, their mental health, their thoughts about life, their thoughts about ending life, their thoughts about how he would choose to die. He changes his mind, he changes direction, and he lives. And I think that the church, we have to find in our theology a way to communicate with people, to let them know that there is this connection between our theology and our therapy as relates to working with families. And so that story, along with a few others, has been the theological push for me to not only deal with my own mental health and to really be transparent about where I am at different seasons and different times in my life, but to also try to prepare something that addresses the people in our community and in the world by saying to them, we are here. We are here, and you have some options as it relates to living and as it relates to life. So I would just say that and I know Love Akron, this is so theologically and Christian based, that we're the ideal of allowing our theology to drive us to help people and to give them life is so important. And I guess that's what I would say. I know before I was going in and out, you all were talking about suicide, but that passage was just so fresh in my mind and in my heart, and it kind of reminded me of what the drive, what that drive is that pushes us to do this.
Listen, Pastor Dennis, for our audience out there, Pastor Dennis is going to be doing a Super Monday for us in 2022. He don't know it yet, but I'm just volunteering that, telling me all due respect, Pastor, that we need to hear that. We need to hear that as the body of Christ, that it's okay. And you said it, and we gotta get that quote down. When you talked about our theology, and you mixed it with what was the other words you said?
Our therapy. It's therapy. Yeah. And I think Mike and Tony, with their background, really understand that connection. And especially as African-centered pastors and professionals in the field, that connection between theology and therapy is not necessarily something that's taught in our institutions. But we do know that if we're going to help our people, that the understanding of those two and how they work together can literally transform the thinking and the lives of people. Sometimes we have to think of it in terms of theology or therapy and discipleship. What's your discipleship plan that you would give to a person that would help them to live a healthy, well life? What does that discipleship plan look like? I guarantee you, if you look at Michael's therapy plan and Tony's approach, it would be so similar because they understand the connection between that whole piece, especially when you talk about African Americans, that connection between theology and therapy. And I think that the one thing that I would add, Kemp, you're a pastor, you understand this whole alliteration piece, and Pastor Lori as well. There's a piece of transparency. That transparency piece has to be in there. How do we help create atmospheres where people can become transparent? In the Psalms, for instance, one of the psalm writers says, Why am I so discouraged?
Mm.
Why am I so sad? And in that psalm, the psalmist is talking to himself. Self-talk is important. So he's talking to himself and he's asking himself that question. And he is being transparent about where he is. He's discouraged. He's sad. He feels like giving up. So we have to create atmospheres where, from a theological perspective, we point out examples in scripture where people are transparent about how they feel. You have Elijah saying, God, take my life. Enough is enough. People being transparent about how they feel. And when they do that, we can present to them or show them that there are options that they have, things that can help them to face and to walk through some of the issues that they're challenged with.
Wow. Pastor Dennis, as always, man, you nail it like for my whole life, as long as I've ever known you. That's amazing. And Coach Kemp was right. We'll be reaching out to you because we're going to be doing some amazing Super Mondays, we call them. It's opportunity times where folks like yourself and uh, Tony, I want to say doctor, each of you will come and share your wisdom and knowledge with those in our community that are leading. We do something called Love Akron Connect, and we talk about hot leadership. Hot, Kemp often says, not in the way he looks, but in the fact that we want to be humble, open, and transparent. And I believe you all will agree that transparency is not something that culturally we have been given the permission to be in our entire life. We are in a different day and a different hour. Things have changed. There's been a changing of some guards. And I think that we are sitting in a good place and a good time to kind of course correct some of the things that have been done. Not to, I would have to say some things have been done and it was just people didn't know any better. And I do want to put a disclaimer out there, if I can call it that, also to say that, we are talking specifically about at the African American population today. But we are not exclusively having that conversation every day. We are looking to, as you know, I said earlier, we have trained 15 grief recovery method specialists. And it was a pilot program within the African American community. However, if you are not African American and or minority, but you need the grief recovery method, I want to tell you that you can go to our website at loveakron.org and you can register under the grief recovery method. There's still a little bit of time. This pilot technically ends on the 30th, but we will still be serving people in the Akron Summit County community until forever. That's our goal, is to never stop helping people to become emotionally healthy, mentally healthy. I want to thank Dr. Montgomery. I want to thank my buddy, Tony Ingram. I want to thank Pastor Jeff Dennis, the amazing work that your daughter, Sierra, is doing and you all have done for over the years at Minority Behavioral Health. You have been a beacon of light in our community. There is still hope. I'm going to just kind of, if you'll allow me, yield the floor to Pastor Dennis to have sort of a 1-minute closing remark, because we're going to enter into the holiday season. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. People have lost loved ones, and perhaps some of us who have not lost loved ones to COVID in particular may be a little bit out of touch with the measure and the degree of grief that surrounds us every day. I believe that Thanksgiving is going to bring about something different, Christmas, New Year's. And so I'd like to just kind of yield the floor to you, Doctor. Is Doctor right? I know you've been working on it, Dr. Dennis. But I'd like to yield the floor to you and ask you, just not even from a pastoral platform just from a mental health, a man in America with a family and children, a wife, all the things that concern us all. I'd like to give you a minute to just give us some closing thoughts that you want us to take home. We're going to be doing this again. So stay tuned. You guys keep up with Love Akron, but we're going to give Pastor Dennis that final 1 minute, and then we're going to wave goodbye. Pastor Dennis.
All right. Thank you, Pastor Lori. Thank you again for just the opportunity to share. And Tony, continue the great work that you're doing as well. And Mike, those of you who are watching, Mike is a great therapist. Connect with him. I'm sure the Lord will use him to help bring the healing that you may need. During the holiday season, Pastor Lori, for many years, I used to go through periods of depression. And I couldn't figure out why I would be so depressed during this particular season. And one day it really hit me that this was the season that my father died years ago. I was a child, and I had a lot of unresolved issues connected to his death and his loss. I never faced it. I never grieved it. I never dealt with it. I didn't deal with it until I was in my 50s.
Wow.
And I went through grief recovery. As I was going to become a certified grief recovery person, I focused in on my feelings and the issues connected to my father's death. It was one of the best things that I've ever done in my life, going through grief recovery, because it helped me to really identify some things, to be able to name some of the feelings that I had and to name some of the issues that I was dealing with. And when you can name them, then you can develop an approach to deal with them. So it was so helpful for me. So during this season, we will have a number of feelings. They are not always going to be good feelings. There is the joy of the season, and then for many, there is the sadness of the season. And I would just say to those who are watching, and I'm sure it would be consistent with what Tony and Mike would say as well, try to be as real as you can in terms of getting in touch with how you really feel. Reach out and talk with someone about your feelings, if possible. Share with them where you really are. Pray about your situation as well. But take even the additional steps that are necessary to find the healing that you may need. If you need to see someone professionally, it's all right. It's all right. So just reach out. Understand these feelings are real. They're normal during this season. And there are people who are out there to help you. Get your help like I got mine. I can face these days a lot better now because I was able to deal and look at and deal with my feelings of grief connected to my father. That's all I would say, Pastor Lori.
Wow. Thank you so very much. Well, you all have heard it from Pastor Dennis, from Tony Ingram, and from Mr. Dr. Montgomery. Thank you all for speaking into this very hot topic. I want to share with you all that here at Love Akron, we are here, and you've seen us kind of scale back a little bit, because we needed to catch our breath and take a bit of a rest. But we're coming back full-fledged in 2022. But before we get there, just make a note, put it in your calendar that we won't be in our normal Love Akron Connect on the last Wednesday of this month because it is the day before Thanksgiving. So instead of being here the last Wednesday at 7 a.m. for Love Akron Connect, we're going to do a special Connect on the 8th, and we're going to look at some hot folks, humble, open, and transparent volunteers that are working on the Sojourner Truth Project here in our own city. On December 1st, right here, same time, same station. Join us for the One City Initiative. We're going to talk to you about the quadrants and how we've divided up Summit County into 4 quarters. And we hope to mirror in every quarter the assets that exist all over our city. And then finally, on the 15th of December, same time, same station, 1:30 again, right here, Facebook, YouTube. We're going to come back and have I call it a powwow with our partners and talk to them about the work that we have been able to do together in the city of Akron, which just kind of gives credence to the fact that our mission in Love Akron is to connect with change makers, to make a collective impact so that our city can continue to thrive. Well, fellas, thank you all again. To our viewing audience, thank you all for being with us. I'm going to bring them back on the screen here. Danny, shout out to you. Amazing job today. Sharina's back there like hand on shoulder. Sharina's going to Georgia. Danny, stay in here. Thank you, Jesus. But they did a fabulous job today. To our viewers, again, you want that grief recovery method? We have specialists waiting to serve you. Go to loveakron.org. Look for the grief recovery method. Go ahead and register. We'll get you connected in an initial interview with one of our many therapists, and then get you connected to a class or an individual to take you through the method. Well, Coach Kemp often closes out this way, and I don't want to change it. He simply says, remember on today that if you don't do anything else, make sure that you love Akron. We'll see you on the 1st at 1:30. God bless you. Thank you all again. Thank you.
Take care.
Amazing.
Good to see you, Pastor.
Thank you. Beautiful.